So I have to tell you guys the very, very sad news, which is that Bray Wyatt passed away at 36 years old. And it's not even like 5 minutes ago I found out this really somber news. And it's also just, to be a little selfish, it's also really sad because, Terry Funk passed away yesterday, and then AEW has their Wembley show, which is a very, very important pay per view in professional wrestling because, it shows that being counterculture to WWE is very important in wrestling, and I really think that AEW's Wembley almost feels a little bit like a Woodstock type of thing, where it is just saying that the WWE status quo is not is there's an audience outside the WWE status quo, and that also makes me think about Bray Wyatt a lot. That honestly, when you think about the 2010s of professional wrestling, post Linda McMahon's campaign, post Chris Benoit, definitely post WCW. You've seen Vince McMahon have a lot of creative control in professional wrestling, and there was a huge monopoly. So when you saw wrestlers like Bray Wyatt really push his creative style, this almost demented Tim Burton meets the most adult thing you can find in the Batman graphic novels meets a very twisted dark comedy that's actually entertaining like South Park, and he kind of has all that. It was definitely very a fresh relief, especially with what you kind of seen with WWE always insulting people's intelligence by making it too PG, having Muppets on the show, having wrestlers with a lot of potential in very ridiculous situations, like how you kind of saw FTR be the 24/7 champions, how you kind of saw wrestlers like Zack Ryder with a lot of potential just treated like crap, and how you have people like John Moxley taking vaccinations because he's allergic to the audience. Like when you saw Bray Wyatt, you saw somebody who did not insult our intelligence, who worked hard to be a creative storyteller, who really just was also saying too that f the PG era, it insults people's intelligence. It can't always be the Disney Channel in WWE, or how they wanted to even change to sports entertainment because they felt professional wrestling was too violent of a name. Bray Wyatt was somebody who really just emphasized that wrestling can once again be for everybody, and it doesn't have to be watered down kiddie crap. And then the other thing that he really emphasized is just how, with professional wrestling, you look at Vince McMahon and his very, dictatorship type of creative control, taking scripts, ripping it up, not listening to other people's ideas, where if he had somebody else's idea, he would take it and make it his own, and just all that type of stuff, really. And it's gotten so bad that that's why AEW exists. But when you look at Bray Wyatt, you saw, a gleaming hope that, wrestlers can really exist and be in WWE, especially, and have their own creative vision. You don't have to do what Matt Hardy did and actually go to TNA to have his own creative vision. That once again, Bray Wyatt said that even in WWE, you can have your own creative vision. You can create a creative character. You can create a character that is controversial and violent and edgy, in an era that's still affected by the PG era, and be successful enough to be a WWE champion, a Universal champion, and that be that, really. And I also think that I'm a little happy that the Firefly Funhouse and all the Bray Wyatt stuff, it kind of was really short lived because we appreciate it more. You look at a character like Kane, like how he kind of went from being this ultimately edgy character to, in the PG era, he almost became very comical and other things like that. With Bray Wyatt, you have that just a little bit. Mostly you have Bray Wyatt as Bray Wyatt. You even look at someone like The Undertaker, who has a lot of backstage pull, but we all know with The Undertaker, even though it's not the same thing as the Attitude Era and not as intense, with Satanism and paganism and violence in his gimmick, it's very, very hard to kind of, when people just have different, when they're different, audiences that come in and different sensibilities happen, It's easy to take a character like The Undertaker or Kane and kind of make them comical or silly, but more so you kind of see that with Kane. And you don't really see that with Bray Wyatt. He was so short lived that I don't think that they ever really just try to PG him or whatever and stuff like that. And I also will hope that, with professional wrestling companies learn from wrestlers like Bray Wyatt to be like, okay, if there's an idea that a wrestler has and it's a little bit edgy or out of the box, we should also listen to that and give it a voice. We don't do the Vince McMahon thing where, maybe 1,000 out of 1,000, I actually listen to you, because that makes really good storytelling. And I also really would say that, there are people who are very creative, like Bray Wyatt, whose characters and everything was kind of its own universe. There are people like, I remember when I was in high school, I read a bunch of graphic novels and I had this whole universe of assassins and stories inside my head. You look at somebody like Quentin Tarantino, he has his own like universe of stories and ideas. You look at somebody like Walt Disney, you look at somebody like Seth MacFarlane's, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, Matt Hardy. It could be in wrestling or outside of wrestling, but you come up with these very rare people who almost have these universes in their head of different ideas and philosophies and a story that is so charismatic, it's so good, it comes out of the real world and it's successful, that you have to listen to those people and give those people chances, because sometimes you just never know the impact that they can have. And I really think that the biggest impact I want to see out of Bray Wyatt is that, as I said, if there are some wrestlers that have maybe their own like fantasy fiction or whatever, and it was actually good and compelling, that they can go into like their boss's office, share it, and see if that can lead to something. So rest in peace, Bray Wyatt. Like, this is very tragic, because I think on one side it's good that he had brief success, because there's such a thing, as I said, about him becoming a novelty act, or him just becoming like, okay, what happens if something tragic happens? What would happen if another Chris Benoit happens, and then they say, okay, wrestling has to be TVG, and they got to take Bray Wyatt and make him TVG or something like that. You've not kind of seen that with his character. So, I do think that while he was short-lived, at least we kind of seen the true, intense, more adult, true to Bray Wyatt's vision versus, something very watered down. And then I would also kind of say, too, that, he was a very resilient man, and he was a very resilient creative. Like, obviously, when you saw him lose to Goldberg, and a lot of people said that was a BS decision, or you seen him lose to Randy Orton and lose a bunch of times, he still kept going, and he still did the best that he could do, and I really appreciate people like that. There's people like me who's done, like I've talked about the 48-hour film project and how I got knocked down so easily because of bullying and people getting under my skin, and then also just being so mad when I kept seeing films about people drinking, doing comedies, like kind of an edgy version of a Disney Channel film, when I've kind of wanted to be somebody saying, what about the intense films you see in the 70s? I'd love to bring that style to the 48-hour film project. I've learned to kind of give up and bitch, but there's people like Bray Wyatt who would just still work with Vince, still try to fight for his vision and be resilient. He doesn't just go on YouTube like I do and bitch too many times, or he doesn't just say, what, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sit on my ass and write out my contract. He did the best he could. And that says something about resiliency. It takes a long time sometimes to get your creative vision out. You look at The Fifth Element, like Luke Besson had that idea in his head since high school, but it took him like 20, 30 years to be a producer and produce that. You look at other people like too as well, like even like Matt Hardy, like a lot of his Broken Hardy thing, he probably would not have ever been allowed to do anything like that to that extreme in WWE. He had to go to TNA and do that. So sometimes you have a vision and people don't get it, or people don't want to hear it, or people just are so in their ways that they're too arrogant to kind of trust a new idea. But you never give up on your vision and your dream. You keep fighting until that becomes a reality. So he's a person of perseverance. So that's all I got to say about Bray Wyatt. Rest in peace.